Hello, and welcome to another Progressives for Immigration Reform podcast. I am your host, Kevin Lynn, and today is September 3rd, 2021. And today we have a real treat for everyone. I'm here with Dr. Nayla Rush of the Center for Immigration Studies, and we're going to be talking about refugees and special immigrant visas, paroles, all these terms that you've been hearing in the press for the last few weeks with regard to Afghanistan and the migration and the airlifting of thousands and thousands of Afghan citizens, as well as American citizens, as well as Afghans with special types of statuses here in the US. But before we get into it, I want to give an introduction to Dr. Rush. And it's really, you're going to see what a treat we're in for, because she has some amazingly unique qualifications in this arena. Now, Dr. Nayla Rush is a senior researcher at the Center for Immigration Studies. She's focusing on refugee and asylum policy. She holds a PhD in migration studies from the University of Sussex in the UK, matrice in sociology from the Sorbonne in Paris, and a BA in sociology from American University in Beirut. Dr. Rush is an expert in global issues related to international migration, analyzing migration's impact on the social, cultural, and economic dynamics of societies. Now, her main regional interests are in the United States, Europe, and the Mediterranean. And what's as well, she looks beyond these geographical areas and historical cultural traditions for a general, and takes these general lessons and perspectives from these long range views. And more importantly, one, I think, Dr. Rush, you're extremely unique because your academic concentration was in migration studies, but also you're a native of Lebanon. You became a US citizen recently. You are fluent in English, French, and Arabic. So much of your information you can actually garner firsthand. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Nayla Rush to the show. Welcome, Dr. Rush.
Hi, Kevin. Well, you make me sound so good. I want to meet this woman.
Yeah, I think she's pretty darned amazing. And
don't believe everything that's written out there.
Well,
anyway.
You know, it's interesting. We had talked in the pre-interview, and you have also something that gives you a very unique perspective is you grew up in a conflict area. I couldn't help but think during our conversation, I was in the 1980s, I was in a class on terrorism at the US Army Intelligence Center in school. And part of it was taught by a Marine. His name was Les Minahan. And he was the intelligence officer for the Marines who were in Beirut when the barracks were blown up. So, I mean, I see these things from a certain perspective, but there's so much that you have a lived experience in that I know our listeners are really going to get a lot out of today.
Yeah, that was a sad day. I was in Beirut when the Marines were killed, and very sad day. Yeah, I have spent most of my life in Lebanon, and I can say I have lived through conflicts, but it doesn't make me a victim. And I am in short, very, very grateful that I am here and that you have accepted me within your people. And I feel totally grateful and blessed. Thank you.
Well, it's great to have you here, and we're actually blessed with your expertise. And I'd really like, Nyla, to get your thoughts on when you look at how the system of moving refugees from conflict zones to and resettling them in other areas works, and more specifically, how that all relates to what's going on in Afghanistan today. Because as I said in the preamble, a lot of terms are being thrown out there, like special immigrant visas, certain different types of statuses, refugees, asylees, migrants, immigrants, parolees. If you can help give some insight into what's going on, I would really appreciate it. I know our viewers would too.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Anyway, this is a bit of a complex, and I know that, like you said, people are using words interchangeably, not really knowing. They talk about Afghan refugees. These might not be refugees. These might be potential refugees or SIVs or parolees. Anyway, there are different words matter. But let's go back to the start with the Refugee Resettlement Program, which is an official program the US has entered with the United Nations. What it means is it's different from people who are coming here at the border and seeking asylum. That's two different things, okay? So the Refugee Resettlement Program is a program that is based following the 1967 protocol relating to the status of refugees that the US signed. And it was incorporated into US law by the Refugee Act of 1980.
1980,
so anyway,
okay.
So what it means is that the United States has agreed to resettle refugees in collaboration with the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR. What happens is most of the refugees leave conflict areas, leave their countries to neighboring countries, and they seek asylum and they become refugees in a country of asylum. Let's say Syrians, lately we talk about the Syrian crisis, left Syria, went to Lebanon, went to Jordan, went to Iraq, and became refugees. They are helped with the United Nations, funded by countries, mainly by the United States, to help these people in their country as asylum. We're talking about millions, okay? Millions of refugees. You have 20 million worldwide refugees.
So we're about 20 million refugees worldwide, okay.
Yes, not displaced refugees. Of these 20 million, the United States, the United Nations believes that some cannot stay where they are and is looking for a durable solution for them.
And when you say they can't stay where they are, does that mean they can never, for some reason, never repatriate back to that country once, let's say, hostilities have ended?
Yeah, that's a good question. You have three durable solutions according to the UN. One is return when it's safe, and it has to be voluntary return. One is local integration, meaning they become citizens of the country that is hosting them, and they live and work and are okay. And one is resettlement, meaning they cannot do either, and they cannot stay where they are. So resettlement supposedly is to take people out of their country of asylum, not the country of war. They are already left the country of war, but because they cannot stay there for a reason or another, either they are persecuted there, or they are threatened because of the sexual tendencies, etc., or religion, then you need to take them out of their country of asylum. So that is called resettlement. The United Nations estimates those who need resettlement worldwide is 1.4 million or something. Okay. But they can only refer, because to refer people for resettlement, it's their processes, and you have resources, and all these are limited. So anyway, they refer some 100,000 people for resettlement every year. So every country, you have I think 29 countries, if I'm not mistaken, maybe more now, who agree to take people, to take the refugees through this program, the resettlement program, meaning they come they go to Canada, they go to Australia, they go to the United States, but they become citizens and live there. So let's come to the United States. The refugee resettlement program has a ceiling, meaning every year, the president determines how many we are going to resettle. And they also have priorities and regional emergencies, like we want to resettle more from Africa or this or that. Okay,
it's not nothing that's cast in stone. It can be it tends to be more subjective. Is that what you're saying, Dr. Rush?
What I'm saying, no, what I'm saying is every year, the numbers are set by the president and supposedly in not collaboration, in coordination with Congress. That's not the word I'm looking for, not coordination. Okay, it'll come back to me. But anyway, and the number is set. So you can't, there's a ceiling. Now you can bring less, but you can bring more. If you want to bring more, you have to go and have another presidential determination. And the categories that you want to bring are set in view of the global emergencies and global politics, you see, and the United Nations needs. So every year, this year, before President Biden took over, we had a ceiling of 15,000 refugees. President Biden kept
which is a historic low, isn't it? When you look at past years,
it is a historic low, but let's not go overboard, because when we talk about millions of refugees, like the most ceiling that we had recently in modern times was set by President Obama, which was 115,000 before he left, and that was decreased by President Trump. So we're talking in general of 100,000 refugees worldwide. You don't have more than that. I mean, it's like
right, because you had mentioned there might be 1.4 million of 20 million, but only 100,000 are really needing removal to a country other than where they're staying.
No, that's not what as I said, Kevin, I said that supposedly the UN says there is 1.4 million in need of resettlement.
In need of resettlement. 1.4 million in need of resettlement.
But only 100 to 200,000 are resettled per year. So how do they calculate that? How do they come to this figure? What happened to those who are not resettled? Are we resettling them the next year or in 5 years? And meanwhile, how do they survive if they are in urgent need of resettlement? These are questions that perhaps we don't have answers, and we're not going to get to the subject today. But there's a difference between what the United Nations says the need of and the actual reality of those who are being resettled.
I see. And a lot of that would be like in the case of the United States, our internal politics would factor into that.
Yeah, definitely, because it's the president puts the ceiling, and because and the pressure of refugee advocates lately, like I said, it's President Biden finally increased the ceiling that was he had left around 15,000 by Trump. He increased it to 62,500. In I think the last 2 months. We, however, and that's very important for your listeners, we only admitted this fiscal year around 6,500. Now these numbers are by the end of July. So that would be the lowest. Even under President Biden, the numbers did not really increase. And I am sure President Biden is going to blame President Trump for the low numbers. However, I don't believe that's the case.
Now, you had mentioned let's go down that rabbit hole of internal politics, and you had mentioned some players that are in there. Last year, you did a really amazing paper on the resettlement agencies, that these are non-government organizations. Some of them are secular, some of them are non-secular. And am I correct? They're paid per head to resettle in refugees here in the United States, and they include folks like Church World Services.
Yeah. So what happens when with this resettlement program, you need help. You need people on the ground in the region, in the country of asylum, that is helping refugees to put their cases together, to write, to get their documents processed. These are called RSCs, Resettlement Support Centers.
Okay.
And you have resettlement agencies here in the United States who take care of refugee the moment they land into the United States. They take care, they meet them at the airport, they take them to their homes that they rented for them in the cars, and they help them with the putting kids in school, signing up for benefits, giving them cash. They are assisted for the first 8 months. They are helping them get a job, Social Security, etc., etc. These resettlement agencies here that are 9, and you're right, some are religiously based, most actually are, but some are not, are paid by the US, by taxpayers, by us, by the US government.
I'd like to give some of those numbers, Nyla,
Okay.
if I may. And I'm actually quoting from your paper.
Okay.
For instance, Church World Services, they, in 2016, they took in a total of roughly $93 million in contributions and grants. Now, 73% of that, or 68,448,000, actually came from the American taxpayer.
Mm-hmm.
Episcopal Migration Ministries, 99.5% of all of their grants came from US taxpayers. Ethiopian Community Development Council, ECDC, they brought in roughly 18 million, of which 97.3% came from directly the taxpayers through government grants. Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, they roughly 58% of their 41 million in contributions and grants came from US taxpayers. International Rescue Committee, roughly 67% of the 730 million that they brought in, of which 493,570,000 came from US taxpayers. And I'll close with Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services. They took in a total of $67,228,000 in 2016, of which 96.2%, or 64,666,000, came from taxpayers. So this is a lot of money. This isn't chump change. And part of me says, when you incent a group with this much money, you'd almost want them to see this refugee train continue. And you could kind of see where the politics begin to get murky. Is that a correct assessment, Dr. Rush?
I'm not going to contradict you on this. I will not say they only do that because of the money, but obviously having this open pipe is helping everybody, and to begin perhaps themselves. If you look at these salaries of these CEOs or directors of these some religious organization, you're kind of bewildered by the head of IIRC, for instance, is making around $1 million a year. And
wow.
Yeah.
Boy, talk about doing well from quote unquote doing good.
Well, probably he does both, but I mean, these are high salaries we have here. Yes, and they always, and not to mention that they criticize President Trump so much when he lowered the ceiling. Right. But I'm going to write on that soon, and perhaps we can talk about it later. Even though the numbers decreased enormously under President Trump. The money that was put into this program by the U.S. government did not decrease accordingly. So they still got money, and like it was at the max at 1.2 billion under President Obama. It decreased to 900 million or something under President Trump, even though you had like 10 times less refugees. So that is also when they say these resettlement agencies, they say, oh, President Trump, we had to close. Well, they had to close. First of all, these 9 resettlement agencies, none closed office. Second, they kept going. They might have closed some of their local affiliates because there weren't so many refugees they were helping anyway, right? So these local affiliates that they have in states, in different states were, yeah.
So I live in Pennsylvania, and I live in Lancaster County. And Church World Services has an amazing presence here. And when I say amazing, their tentacles run through the county, and they seem to push a lot of money out to smaller agencies to help with this resettlement. And it just seems to give them a broad base of popular support in doing this.
Remember that there's another issue it's good you mentioned Lancaster, because that's also one problem that President Trump has addressed, and some governors have been complaining about, is that they are resettling. Who decides who comes and who decides where they go? Okay, the refugee is resettled, meaning you take him from the airport and you drive them or you fly them to a particular state to live and work. Now, granted, afterwards, they can always change, they're not in a prison. And also, between brackets, a refugee, resettled refugee, by law, has to apply for a green card in a year, after a year of arrival. They have to, they will all become green card holders. Remember, this is a permanent solution. They're not here to leave.
Right, supposedly. So being admitted as a refugee is a pathway to citizenship, from what you're saying.
Definitely, it's an obligation, at least to a legal permanent status, which is a green card. Now, once you have a green card, you can apply for citizenship or not. I tend to believe that most do anyway. But the point is, the state government, some state governments and local officials were complaining that they were having to deal with refugees in their state, just imposed on them by who? By the resettlement agencies. Resettlement agencies are the ones who decide where to resettle, in which state to put a refugee or not. And President Trump tried to give a veto power to state governors and local officials and say, hey, you can't resettle refugees in our counties, in our cities, without our agreeing to it. This was blocked by a judge. And of course, Biden just removed the whole thing when he got into power. So now states have practically no say.
Because now with the Afghan refugees, there's roughly, from what I've been able to tell, there's roughly 19 cities, municipalities where they seem to be going. And it doesn't seem that as you were just saying, the local governments have a lot of say in that.
No, there's not a lot of say in that. If you want to move to the Afghan subject.
Yeah, before we do, I'd like to talk to you about, so we've talked about how someone comes to the US as a refugee, that they're assisted by these resettlement agencies, but you had mentioned 8 months, 6 months. And recently CNN interviewed Afghan Americans living in the San Francisco Bay Area. And the Afghans there told the reporters, for instance, one of the interviewees, an Afghan gentleman, said, we don't have the infrastructure to support this. And another asked, how are they going to afford it? When they bring these translators, they usually give them rent money for 6 months And then they put them on the street and say, go, you do it yourself. And the guy went on to say, all these translators, after 6 months, they come to our office and say, what should I do? So where does the resettlement agencies' responsibilities to these new entrants begin and end? And then what happens after that? Because I'm seeing an awful lot personally where a lot of refugees end up on Medicaid, food stamps, they're in public housing, they're getting SSI, disability insurance, and a number of other benefits. And I thought if you could spend a few minutes informing us as to how that system works and who's got the responsibility and when.
That is a great subject to address, because that was always my concern. What happens next? Okay, we bring refugees here, refugee advocates, refugee settlement agencies, everybody wants, bring them, welcome refugees. We have the banners, we pat ourselves on the back, great. Between brackets, just to note, the refugees we are bringing here, you are not picking who is coming. It's the United Nations who refers these refugees to you. So the United Nations decide who comes or who stays. And then you bring as many as you want, according, of course, we just said the city. So resettlement agencies do a good job at welcoming, transferring, finding a home, a car, in a local system, introducing to all the benefits, to the school, to the medical health care, and cash in the beginning, the first 8 months, and finding a job. And they are good at that. And then they say, well, they are self-sustained now. Hey, thank you. And that's it. Well, it's not as simple as that, because many refugees struggle afterwards. It's not easy. If indeed you are bringing the most vulnerable, the most traumatized, those who are really shocked and in need of the greatest help, perhaps we should be more careful about the help we give them, and perhaps do it longer in time. Not just, I don't want to be cynical, but I feel like it's more of, okay, let's bring, that's it, and another group, that's it, and another group, that's it, and they are here, and it's great, and everybody's happy, and let's move on to the other group. And of course, I'm not going to say with more money, but anyway. But see, that's the problem. However, these will become American citizens, or at least green card holders, and will have access to all the benefits that an American or a green card holder has. So yes, they struggle, but perhaps also a lot of American citizens are struggling as well, you see. So I always think that we need long-term studies and follow these refugees and see exactly what care they need and how well we are helping them. And that is why I said, if we bring less refugees, but we have them better and longer and make sure that really they integrate and they are happy, it is a win-win for everybody. It's not about the numbers, it's about how well we do the job. Now, there are always going to be churches and local affiliates, and I'm sure in every state, in every locality, who is willing to help anybody in trouble, as we know in the United States. But is that enough? I'm not sure.
Right. It's, I mean, we're dealing with humans that have been through some, as you mentioned, some pretty significant ordeals. I can only begin to imagine the kind of trauma that someone who had grown up in Mogadishu, Somalia has.
There's a big difference, Kevin, between anybody who have lived a war and resettlement, because you cannot resettle everybody. Okay, or now you will need to resettle every Afghan, or most of the Afghans who do not want to stay in a Taliban rule.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Dr.
So the
Rush.
refugees, sorry, but Kevin, the refugees who are resettling are supposedly refugees who are the most vulnerable, who cannot stay where they are in a country of asylum. safe in a country of asylum. That's the
Safe
point
in
I'm
a
making.
country of asylum. God, that's
Yeah.
an important differentiation. Thank you
Yeah.
for that. But isn't it a way? So, but ultimately, who gets to come to the U.S.? I would imagine if you had to choose, if you mentioned there were 29 countries that participate in refugee resettlement, but if you had to choose between Brazil or the United States, I'm sure people would prefer to try to make their way to the United States. And doesn't it kind of become a matter of luck in a way? Who gets? It's almost. I'm not saying it's a lottery, but you know, there's an element of luck in the draw here, isn't there?
Yeah, I wrote about that, and I said we call them. I call the resettled refugees the lucky ones. Who decides? It's like you're playing God. It's like UN local staff is playing God, because you have so many refugees living in the same under the same circumstances. I'm talking about those who are being resettled. I'm not sure we are bringing those who cannot stay put. I am more of the opinion that it's more subjective. It's just picking those because we know them, because they are here, because we have their applications. And so what about the family next door who is under the same circumstances? Why pick this one? Why not pick another one? You are kind of playing God and saying, hey, you come, you stay, you come, you stay. And where is the morale? Because all the refugee advocates talk about the morale. There's an important note here, Kevin. Wow. Refugees do not decide where to go. They can't say, I want to go to Brazil or I want to go to the United States. It's the resettlement agencies again and the United Nations who decide. You see, unless they are coming here because they already have family. That's different, but they don't know. They say, they come to you and say, okay, we are going to resettle you in Germany. Okay, thank you. And supposedly you're not going to say no, and you can't pick and choose. But they can, but they pick you and choose you.
Interesting. Wow. Thanks so much for that insight. Well, at this point, I'd really like to turn this conversation to Afghanistan and what is going on there. And you know, from your perspective, what is going on there and what is the way forward for us, the best way forward?
So what happened in Afghanistan is we're talking about two different things. We're talking about refugees and we're talking about SIVs. So a lot of people, a lot of times these two are
it's almost like they're synonymous with people, but they're not.
Yeah, confused between the two terms. An SIV is a special immigrant visa that is given. It was given to Iraqis and it is given to Afghans who helped US forces, who worked for the US forces on behalf of US forces and the allied forces in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Supposedly, because whoever collaborated with the US government forces was under threat for his life, his or her life, and needed to leave the country. So the Iraqi SIV ended. The Iraqi, you have two SIV programs. You have one for interpreters / translators. This program is only capped at 50 SIVs a year, fiscal year, 50.
So 50 for translators?
For translators / interpreters.
Okay.
Because whenever everybody's talking about we're leaving all the interpreters behind, but there's only the SIV program can only get 50 a year.
And that has to be based on a certain reality of how many people are actually employed in those as interpreters and translators with US forces.
Not just actually employed, but employed and are threatened or are persecuted or are fear for their lives because of this employment. It's not enough to be employed, because here's the deal. I speak without any irony. A lot of potential SIVs, those who were working with US forces in Afghanistan, were not under threat and did not want to leave and did not apply for SIV. We have 19,000 pending applicants, SIV applicants from Afghanistan, 19,000 only, okay? Meaning that these people probably were working without being threatened when we're, safe and making a living and happy to help. However, now that the US left, how many of those, each one will become a potential SIV, meaning I want to leave because now I can stay. See
Right.
the contradiction here.
And it's not just that one person, it's their immediate family, correct?
When we say 50, we are saying 50 principal applicants, and then it's wives and children, and you have to multiply this by at least 3 times to 5 times, and yes, it becomes much more. Now the SIV for / translators, interpreters is 50, however, and that is ongoing. It does not end. Okay, every year you have 50. Another SIV program for those Afghans who worked on behalf of the US forces in Afghanistan is a temporary program, meaning there's a number there. And once you reach that cap, you fill in all these applications, it ends. It was capped at 26,500, if I'm not mistaken. 26,500. They just added 8,000 to it through a bill that recently passed. I think, Kevin, remind me.
That was the Allies Act, and I can't recall, and I'll look up the congressman but that did pass the Congress. I'm not sure if it passed the Senate.
No.
But
I don't know which but if officially 8,000 spots were added to that, and other modifications were done, like you needed to work 2 years, you needed to be employed 2 years to be able to be eligible for an SIV with, of course, we're saying working with US or on behalf of US forces. They decreased that to 1 year just recently. So, okay, so now you have a total of 34,500 SIVs. That's it. How many were used? You have over 15,000 used.
Okay.
So this means you have around 11,000 plus 800, 19,000 available spot. That is it, unless Congress adds more. So when we talk about we left all the allies behind, these are the numbers. It is not an open, what do you call it?
It's like, we're not talking hundreds of thousands, as I've seen numbers, for instance, that awful neoconservative Billy Crystal was like, well, we should bring over 200,000. And then I've seen calls from Congress people, for instance, Barbara Lee of California and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York recently urged the president to set the refugee cap at no less than 200,000. So they just seem to be using this as an opportunity to just goose the number of entrants to the US.
There's 2 different things. First, when we say 19,000, remember, you need to add 3 times, 5 times more because they are coming with their families. So that's around 100,000. That's actually the number that we have out now that we have. We'll talk about the evacuation numbers later. However, another access to Afghans who helped the US forces or helped somebody, an organization that was funded by the US or helped the US media in Afghanistan or US journalists in Afghanistan. That's totally different. Okay, that's more, helped any contractor in funded by the US. It could be an NGO, etc.
They might have been a janitor.
Exactly, or a or a cook, or
Right,
worked a
a
month.
driver for someone who worked
Yeah,
for the New York Times office there.
exactly. Or people who worked but are not eligible for an SIV. So recently in August, President Biden opened up the refugee resettlement for them through what we call the P2 category or direct access, meaning these, just because they are Afghans, can be referred to the resettlement program and come to the United States as refugees and not be referred by the UN or the embassy, etc. So they are given direct access priority too. These will come under the refugee resettlement program. There's another.
So, but the
another.
P2, isn't that usually reserved for like artists and entertainers?
No. P2 is it's kind of a humanitarian category. You give it to a category of people you think are at risk, and because they are this nationality or this category, they will be able to come.
I just found the definition. It says individuals eligible for the P2 program, Afghans who, as you just mentioned, Afghans who do not meet the minimum time in service for an SIV, but who work or worked as employees of contractors, locally employed staff, interpreter translators of the US government, United States Forces Afghanistan, International Security Assistance Forces, and or resolute support, or Afghans who worked for a US government funded program or project in Afghanistan, supported through a US government grant or cooperative agreement, Afghans who were employed in Afghanistan by a US based media organization or non-governmental organization. Wow, that's really throwing the door wide open.
That's throwing the door wide open. And now the P2 category is for groups of special humanitarian concern identified by the US refugee program. So, and it gives direct access. You have three priorities within the resettlement program. Priority one, it's cases that are identified and referred to the program by UNHCR, as we spoke, a United States embassy, or a designated NGO. Usually it's UNHCR. P2 is this special humanitarian concern identified by the US. And priority three is family reunification cases. So giving access, P2 access to Afghans is a big help to them, because they will be able to access the program faster. However, and these are those who fit the P2. However, there's all the millions of potential refugees, I call them now. You have how many? 38 million Afghans population. Well, millions of them probably will want to leave the country now. And remember, in Afghanistan is mostly women and children. It's that the population is the majority women and children, and so we call them at risk, girls and women, etc. So what do? Do we bring these millions? What happens? Are we opening the door for them? So each one of those can apply to be a refugee under the refugees, can be a potential refugee. Are we going to accept all these people? So there's SIVs, there are refugees through the P2 category, and there are refugees, potential refugees who would want to leave now because the United States left and the Taliban is ruling. So it's a huge mess.
My God, just from your perspective, looking at this just from a practical standpoint, and what could realistically be processed? I mean, how do we begin to, if the intention is to, if women are feeling in Afghanistan, feeling at risk, to get them here, how do we ramp up for something like that? Is that even possible?
You can't, but what you can do is increase, like they are asking, what's her name, Cortez?
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah, the refugee advocates have been asking for an increase in the refugee seeding. Now, remember, this fiscal year, ends end of this month. Okay, there's only one more month. We have not even had 10,000 refugees accepted. We still have another 50,000 spots available this year. But it doesn't work that way. That the process has is limited. Resources are limited. You have to go through a process. You have to file. People are going to read your application. Your IOM is going to get you out. The UN is going to get involved. The HS has to do the security, all these institutions here. So even if you wanted to bring them, you can't. It's impossible to bring hundreds of thousands a month or tens of thousands a month. So it is going to be limited.
Right, just from a logistics standpoint, but looking beyond the logistics, I'd like to get your thoughts on this because, for instance, just recently, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, said, and I'll quote him, "California is a state of refuge. I am proud of the fact that over the last decade, California has taken in more refugees than any other state in America. And I'm proud of the fact that a disproportionate number of Afghani refugees are here in Northern California, not just here in the South, but also up in Sacramento County. We're already working in terms of a lot of these refugees coming in and working with CBOs and nonprofit organizations." And he goes on to say how they celebrate these new members. But this is the state of California. California has the greatest income inequality than any other state in the United States, has the highest homeless population of any other state in the United States. And, it's not going well, particularly among, as I quoted a CNN article of current first wave Afghanis that are living in Northern California. But in 2010, Judith Miller wrote a book or an article called "The Afghans of Fremont." And she reported that, and I quote, "Several Afghans said that many men in the first wave preferred to keep their families on welfare rather than accept work they deemed degrading or unsuitable to their education and social status." Because I'm the son of an immigrant, and the whole thing is like, oh, well, immigrants start at the bottom, work their way up. But here, when you look at the reality of how immigration is playing out on the ground, particularly when you come to the United States poor, the prospects are not good. So the reality's there. Please go ahead.
The Migration Policy Institute did a study about refugees and the economic advancements throughout the year. I wrote about that. You can see my work on CIS.org, and I have to advertise because my communications directors told me you have to advertise. And
well, I will be doing a lot of. There is no better organization out there than the Center for Immigration Studies when it comes to getting the facts. I like to think my organization we have more of an activist bent. We're the hands and the arms and the legs, and you guys are really the brains of the movement. So
thank you, and thank you, Kevin. So the MPI did a study on that, and as I say always, refugees, just as immigrants, just as people, are not interchangeable. Some do good, some don't do good. Some nationalities strive, some don't. Some refugees who came a decade ago economically are doing much better. Some are not doing much better 10 years later. You see, so you have to, and they have a nation, like people from Vietnam are doing much better, etc., on all the economic successes, etc. And Iraqis, for instance, who came are not doing better 10 years later. So you need to be very careful, and you need to study, and not to study to pinpoint, to study to be able to help. We need to do different things for different people. And what you were saying about California, well, maybe California is very happy to be welcoming and to pat the back and say, we're great human beings, we open the door. But then what? What happens next? That's always a question people need to ask. What happens next? And what happens to the millions of refugees who are left behind? What are we doing? We are just putting money, giving millions and billions of dollars to United Nations. But what is happening with that money? How can we do a better job? And I believe we can. To go back to what we can do in the United States, Biden had already said that before all the Afghan debacle, that he was going to increase the refugee ceiling next year to 125,000. Maybe, my guess is he might do it 200,000, okay? But are we going to bring most of those who are going to be Afghan refugees? What about all the rest? Refugees, they don't exist anymore. They're not urgent cases anymore.
Interesting. So you're looking at the rest of the world, and how do we, it's like you have a funnel, you know, it's really big on the one side and it gets very narrow at the bottom. And ultimately that's what can be processed. And so someone's going to win, someone's going to lose, huh?
Exactly. Now, maybe the US feels guilty because they left. But again, the people who collaborated with you, who worked with you, who helped you are not that many. They are not that many. So we're not talking about hundreds of thousands, but potential refugees are. So yes, there should be a priority for those who worked with you and who might be now in danger. I believe most of those are out and will be out sooner than the others. If you want, we can talk about the evacuations and what's been happening and the parolees.
Yes, let's talk about that. We have about another 10 minutes. So let's talk about exactly what is happening down on the ground. I've had some amazing sources of information on this. One fellow was literally able to tell me 2 days before the hour that the last American would leave Afghanistan. And so I've been following it very closely. But again, I just get so confused. We're talking, you see who, you know, initially just seemed to be a big cattle call as to who could get on a plane and get out. There didn't seem to be a very organized way of processing the SIVs and the at-risk types you were talking about.
It was I wasn't there, so I don't know. I just saw images like most of us did on the news. It seemed more of a chaos, and it seemed more whoever could get there was going to get on the plane, and whoever couldn't do it. And it wasn't. Remember, we saw an image of a Marine, I think, holding a woman and getting her, you know, and the other side. So that woman probably is on the plane. Now, he didn't say, show me your papers and show me, are you SIV, are you completed your application? He just, they worked with their guts, with their feelings, and with the emergency, and they have to be applauded for that, to be honest. However, what we know now, exact numbers given 2 days ago by State Department officials, the United States evacuated 124,000 out of Afghanistan, and that was from July 14th through August 31st. Now we know that most of those were Afghans, but most were not Afghan allies.
So people that would not be eligible for SIV or any, we would think consideration.
They could be. Either they have, what we don't know, see, that's, I'll give you the exact wording of that. So of those, over, of those 124,000, 5,500 were US citizens. Okay. Now, over 31,000 have arrived to the United States. So you have 31,000. Of that subset, almost 4,500 are US citizens, 2,700 green card holders, I'm rounding the numbers,
Mhm.
and some 24,000 Afghan nationals. Okay.
And are these the Afghan nationals you spoke of? These are the people that, for instance, are now at Fort McCoy in Wisconsin. They're in
Or
Alexandria,
already,
Virginia, Dulles.
yeah, or already in
So
cities in the
what's
now.
to become of these, that 24,000, knowing that there's another 100,000 like in Qatar and other places waiting to possibly get here?
So of these 24,000 who got in, officially what they say, that these are SIVs, meaning they already have the special immigrant visa. And for your listeners, once you have a special immigrant visa, I mean, it's not you applied for it, but your application has been accepted. The first day you come into you enter the United States, you have a green card on the first day. It's not like a refugee. Refugee has to wait a year. SIV, the first day of admission to the United States, is a green card holder. Okay.
So they're literally, they have an EA employment authorization document. They can work anywhere. They're eligible.
They all, yeah, a green card holder is, as you know, with all the, however, refugee also, even though they can apply for a green card, after a year of admission, they are automatically given employment authorizations, etc. So what these 24,000 that were admitted into the United States, they say, these are, we don't know which is which and how many is which. I'm just citing what they are, reading what they said. These Afghans are SIVs, other SIV holders, other visa holders, I don't know what it is, P1 or P2 referrals, meaning these priority 2 under the refugee resettlement program or the priority 1 under it, so potential refugees, and perhaps others as well. So it's really not clear what they are. So if you come to the United States, you have to have a visa, whether it's as a refugee, as a tourist. Now, a refugee, a potential refugee whose application has not been accepted yet, an SIV whose application has not been accepted yet, does not have a visa. So what happens is that they accept them under the parole system. A parolee is somebody who does not have a visa, but for humanitarian reason, we're going to accept them into the United States, obviously for urgent emergency humanitarian reasons, and give them what we call parole to be able to come.
Is parole different from TPS, like temporary protective status then?
Yeah, parole is different from TPS. Parole is, it gives you the right to be in the United States for 2 years, renewable, and it gives you the right to apply for employment authorization.
Okay.
Now, remember that a parolee can always adjust status. So a parolee will not, when they say parolee are not eligible for benefits, you know, well, who's going to help them? We need more money to help them. It is true, but a parolee will not stay a parolee forever. Especially my guess is that for Afghans, we're going to expedite every application we have. A parolee, an Afghan parolee is going to be more quickly than others given, whether it's SIV or the refugee status or other benefits.
Wow. And I know Mark Krikorian, who heads your organization, who I have enormous respect for, really
Me
bright
too.
guy. He seems to be of the point of view that who's ever landed here and who's ever been airlifted out and might be sitting at Ramstein or Qatar, they're all eventually going to get a pathway to citizenship, regardless of whether they deserve any status or not. Do you subscribe to that?
I agree totally. Look, there's a problem now. Once somebody from Afghanistan entered the United States, let's say they are applying for an SIV, but the application is denied. What do you do? You're going to say, hey, go back to Afghanistan? You can't. If only, even if you wanted to, you can't by law, because international law, the United Nations, we signed for, there's no refoulement, meaning you cannot return people to a situation of where they will be in danger. You can't do it. So once any Afghan is here, they are going to stay here. And we also know now different contexts, but whoever somehow is coming to the United States from other parts of the world, whether from Central America, is more often than not, they tend to stay, right? So imagine with the Afghan, where do you send them back?
Right.
To? And also, how do you vet? How do you vet these people? I mean, if they don't
imagine, I was a counterintelligence officer with the Army in the 1980s, and we would have to attempt in foreign countries to vet people. And it was difficult, even if it wasn't a conflict zone and you had the full participation of the local police and intelligence agencies, vetting people, getting information. I could almost imagine that it is impossible to be able to effectively vet someone coming out of Afghanistan.
Yeah. And so what happened now is that others, well, we said around 30,000, how many came here, were evacuated, arrived?
You said
no, 24,000. 24,000. So all the rest, around 90,000, probably Afghans, are being processed in different parts of the world. How many will we accept? I mean, how many will succeed? We will succeed into vetting, in properly vet. We don't know. So what do you do? Let's say, okay, we evacuated these people. They are on different military bases throughout the world, in Qatar, let's say. Okay, so what do we do with this person that did not succeed? We did not accept because, you know, either they are fraudulent or they work for the Taliban, or I don't know. You can't send them back, but you don't need necessarily to bring here. So my opinion is, first of all, what the US is trying to do now is try to reach out to many of its allies and say, please, can you resettle some of these people we have outside the holding, if we have evacuated outside the United States, and we are processing. Canada has agreed to take 5,000 already. I'm guessing maybe Australia will, because remember that we took Australia's refugees at one point in a deal with Obama did then, and then the Trump administration upheld. And so we could, but that won't be that many. We're still going to have tens of thousands with us that we are going to do, either bring here or find another country to take them. Most of the Afghan refugees now already, and probably in the future, are going to neighboring countries, Pakistan and Iran already, right? So maybe we can send some of those under the United Nations responsibility to some of these countries.
And doesn't that make sense? Eventually, conflicts do tend to ground down, and there might be opportunities to repatriate if you're close by.
Well, that is what also many of the refugee scholars have spoken of, and two of them that I cite are Betts and Collier from Oxford University, who say most of the refugees flee to neighboring countries, millions of them. Resettlement is only the tip of the iceberg. We talk about a few thousand going to rich countries, while the millions are suffering in the neighboring countries. What we should do is not concentrate on this resettlement like most people do here with the welcome banners, because even if you bring more and more, you can't bring all, definitely. And it doesn't mean they're going to be perhaps happier here,
Right,
especially if you don't give
exactly.
them the right help, if they don't speak the language, if they don't have an education. I mean, migration, I'm an immigrant, it is not easy, and I've had the best conditions to succeed mine, but for them, imagine. So that what they say is concentrate on helping better those who are in the neighboring countries. And
To be
so
successful.
when the conflict ends, because it is going to end at one point, like you just said, they can go back to their homes and rebuild their countries.
Wow.
And only resettled really those who really like can't stay, and these are really a few thousand. We're already resettling, but I don't think we're resettling people, those who need resettlement. I think we're just randomly resettling numbers and numbers and numbers, just like those we got on the plane, because it's an emergency, because it's humanitarian, because it makes us feel better.
And we want to feel better. You know, I was a volunteer with the Red Cross in California when 9/11 happened. And it was amazing. People were just lining up to donate blood. But as you know, there wasn't the need because there weren't a lot of wounded. But we took it knowing it would go bad because, well, people wanted to feel good. And I think when I look at this, and I'll just say all this in closing, Nyla, that we have created this invade and invite paradigm that seems to support the debt and death paradigm of our corporatocracy and this whole neoliberal view of the world. And we need to bring that to an end. And yeah, I think because this economy in America is so consumer oriented, we've all had a piece in this, what I would call an epic military failure that is in Afghanistan. But I think if we want to make amends, we have to look ourselves in the mirror and, commit to just doing things differently going forward and looking at, how we can best take care of our vulnerable people, knowing that we've made a lot of people vulnerable in the world. We now need to, I think, look more inward and say, what can we do to help our most vulnerable? And that needs to be the priority. And yes, if we can, I'm reminded there's a phrase from Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching where he says, if you want to practice charity, you must first practice economy. And I think that's what we have to do as a nation, to be much more judicious about who we extend citizenship to, our participation in these refugee resettlement programs. And, I think if we can do that, look ourselves in the mirror, we might actually, in some way, some small way, benefit from this experience in Afghanistan and Iraq. But Dr. Nayla Rush of the Center for Immigration Studies, I thank you so much for spending this hour with me and our audience. I know I learned a great deal. I know everyone listening to this will. And if you could once more tell us, Dr. Rush, how they can find you on social media and how they can find your organization.
I'm not very active on social media. I have Twitter account, which I hardly use, but my organization, I urge everybody to read not just my work, but the great work that I think we do. And I am being subjective, is go to cis.org, and you have all the podcasts, you have all the blogs, the reports from my colleagues and myself. And I hope you'll enjoy the read. Wonderful. And listening to us today. Thank you, Gavin, for having me.
Wonderful. Well, thanks. I want to thank our audience for joining us today. If you enjoyed this is an audio podcast, but it's going to be put up on YouTube. Please give us that thumbs up, because that really helps with the algorithm, helps spread this word more. Also, go to the PFIRDC.org website or the USTechWorkers.com website. Go to that support page and hit that donate button, because it is on your donations that we're able to go out and do work like this, getting you the information you need that helps you make better informed decisions and be all in all better citizens. Again, thanks everyone for joining and have a great day.